A royal guard noticed a secret signal from Prince William during a gala, the emergency extraction. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace shimmered like a jewel under the soft glow of countless crystal chandeliers. The air was filled with the gentle hum of polite conversation, the soft clinking of glasses, and the faint notes of a string quartet playing a delicate waltz in the corner. Everywhere he looked, Sergeant James Hawthorne saw an ocean of elegance, diplomats in finely tailored suits, ambassadors draped in exquisite gowns, and royals moving gracefully through the crowd with practiced ease. The palace had prepared for this gala for weeks. Everything, from the placement of the tables to the arrangement of flowers, was meticulously planned to impress and to maintain the image of calm perfection. But James knew that beneath the glittering surface, vigilance was everything. James had been a royal guard for over a decade. He had spent years learning to read the subtle language of people, to notice what most others overlooked. His eyes, trained to catch the faintest hint of danger, swept the crowd even as he appeared to be part of the elegant surroundings. The guests did not know him personally, but they felt a strange sense of calm near him, as if his presence itself created a protective bubble. He wore the standard uniform with quiet dignity, but every movement, every slight shift of his stance was calculated. This was his world, a world of silent observation, of anticipating threats before anyone even sensed them. At the center of the ballroom, Prince William moved with the effortless charm expected of a royal. He shook hands politely, nodded thoughtfully at carefully prepared speeches, and smiled warmly, making each guest feel uniquely acknowledged. To the untrained eye, it was a perfect evening, glittering, composed, and flawless. But James noticed the small things, a bead of sweat on a diplomat's brow despite the cool temperature of the room. A man lingering a little too long near the ornate columns, pretending to admire the architecture. These details were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But to James, they were pieces of a puzzle, a faint but important pattern that hinted at something more. Then it happened, a gesture so small that anyone else would have missed it entirely. As Prince William reached out to shake hands with a visiting dignitary, his fingers tapped ever so slightly against the armrest of his chair. James froze, his eyes narrowing. He had seen this signal before, a nearly imperceptible code, used only in the most serious situations. It was a signal to the guards that danger was imminent, that the situation required immediate attention, but that there was no time to alarm the public. The prince's calm demeanor masked urgency, but to James, the meaning was unmistakable. James's heart rate increased slightly, though he kept his face calm. He adjusted his position, moving subtly closer to the prince without drawing attention. Every step, every slight movement had to be precise. He could not let the other guests notice anything unusual, or the delicate balance of the evening could collapse into chaos. He scanned the crowd with renewed focus, his mind rapidly analyzing each face, each movement. Where was the threat? Who had the intention and possibly the means to create harm in such a high-profile setting? These were questions he needed answers to immediately, though the answers were far from obvious. The ballroom's opulence seemed to grow heavier with tension as James observed. Every glittering gown, every polished shoe, every decorative mask or accessory suddenly took on a new significance. Patterns of movement became more than social dance. They became signals, potential warnings. James noted a young woman standing near the grand staircase, chatting animatedly with an ambassador, but her eyes were constantly scanning the room. He observed a man near the buffet table, leaning slightly forward as though trying to get a better look at the prince's reactions. His training told him that these might not be coincidences. Every detail mattered. James discreetly adjusted his earpiece, touching it gently as if checking the fit. A soft, almost inaudible whisper came through, the voice of the palace security command confirming readiness. Protocols existed for situations like this, though they were rarely used. Only a few guards were trained for immediate emergency extractions during public events, and James was among them. The thought that he might have to act within moments weighed on him, yet he felt a strange clarity. Years of training had prepared him for this, and he trusted his instincts. Every move had to be precise, every decision perfect, for even a small mistake could escalate the situation into a crisis. Prince William continued to greet guests, his smile unwavering. He exchanged words of polite interest with a visiting diplomat from Europe, nodding as the man spoke. But James knew that behind the calm, the prince's eyes had already told a story of subtle urgency, a silent request for help. This unspoken language between them, built over years of training and understanding, was critical now. James could act, but he had to do so without attracting attention, without causing alarm. To the rest of the world, the evening remained a flawless spectacle. Behind the scenes, however, the palace's most trusted guardian was preparing for what might be the most important moment of his career. The crowd continued to swirl around the ballroom, oblivious to the tension that had quietly entered their midst. Waiters moved elegantly between guests, offering champagne in crystal flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. Musicians played softly, the gentle melody a contrast to the sharp focus in James's mind. The palace's beauty, the intricate decorations, the golden light reflecting off the chandeliers, all these elements now seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of potential danger. James's training reminded him to remain calm, to control his breathing, to let observation guide his next steps. Panic could be deadly, composure could save lives. As he edged closer to Prince William, James noted another subtle cue. The prince's foot shifted slightly beneath the table, another coded signal confirming the need for immediate attention. It was a small motion, almost impossible to detect, but James saw it. That silent, almost invisible movement told him everything he needed to know. The emergency was real, and the extraction might need to begin sooner than anyone could anticipate. His mind raced with the logistics, safe routes, potential exits, positions of fellow guards, but he never lost focus on the immediate need, the safety of the prince. James's eyes flicked back to the crowd once more, scanning for the source of danger. He noticed a man near the edge of the ballroom, leaning casually against a pillar. The man's posture seemed relaxed, but his gaze was fixed on Prince William in a way that made James uneasy. Every instinct in James's body told him to watch this individual closely. At the same time, he remained aware of the people surrounding the prince, ensuring no one noticed the subtle shift in attention. The palace security system, the carefully trained staff, the silent understanding between guard and royal, all of it would be put to the test in the coming moments. The gala continued, a picture of refinement and elegance, yet every second passed with an undercurrent of tension invisible to all but James. He adjusted his stance, shifting weight from one foot to the other, remaining ready for instant action. Each movement, each observation, had to be perfect. The chandeliers sparkled, the music played, and the guests laughed politely, unaware that the fate of one of the nation's most prominent figures depended entirely on the silent vigilance of a single guard. James took a final, careful breath, steadying himself for what might come next. The tap of Prince William's fingers on the armrest had been clear, unmistakable. The gala's beauty, its elegance, its calm exterior, all of it was a mask. Behind it lay the very real possibility of danger, and James was ready. As the prince smiled at another guest, James's eyes narrowed in silent determination. Tonight, the palace's glittering halls would become more than a stage for pomp and ceremony. They would become the setting for a test of courage, skill, and vigilance that James had prepared for his entire career. James's mind worked faster than ever, cataloging every detail of the ballroom, the guests, and the subtle movements that could indicate danger. The faint tapping of Prince William's fingers against the armrest had been a silent warning, but James needed more confirmation before taking action. The code was never used lightly. It signified an immediate threat that required a discreet but swift response. In moments like these, hesitation could be catastrophic. He edged slightly closer to the prince, keeping his posture natural. From the corner of his eye, he scanned the faces of the attendees, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. Everything about a gala was a performance, every smile, every handshake, every laugh carefully measured. But trained eyes like James's could detect what was real and what was an act. He noticed a man standing near one of the grand windows, pretending to admire the view, yet his gaze constantly returned to the prince. Another figure lingered near a decorative column, casually sipping a drink but shifting subtly whenever someone approached. Small, almost invisible gestures, but to James they spoke volumes. James reached into his uniform jacket and tapped the earpiece tucked neatly against his ear. A barely audible voice responded, calm yet filled with quiet urgency. Command here, situation acknowledged. Proceed with caution. That single confirmation was all James needed to begin assessing the best course of action. The palace had detailed emergency protocols for situations like this, and only a select few guards were trained to execute them. He was one of them. Years of drills, simulations, and real-life exercises had led to this very moment. The first step was observation. James needed to identify the threat without alarming anyone. His eyes scanned the ballroom again, noting subtle signs. A gentleman fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve, glancing nervously at security personnel. A woman speaking quietly to an aide, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder. While these could have been ordinary gestures, the combination of small, repeated motions heightened James's sense of suspicion. Danger often hid in plain sight, and the quietest threat could be the deadliest. Prince William continued to greet guests, shaking hands with practiced warmth and nodding at carefully rehearsed remarks. His smile never wavered, though his eyes flicked toward James once in a subtle acknowledgement. That tiny, fleeting glance reinforced the silent message. Proceed with caution, be ready. James felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but he welcomed it. Every training exercise he had ever completed led to this moment. The ballroom, filled with the world's most influential figures, depended on his vigilance. James's focus was suddenly drawn to a man near the balcony entrance. He was tall, wearing a dark suit, and carried himself with an air of confidence that did not match the surrounding atmosphere of polite restraint. His hands were tucked into his pockets, but James noticed a slight bulge under his jacket, something metallic. His trained instincts kicked in immediately. This could be the source of the threat. Every guard was trained to notice weapons or objects that could pose a risk, but James also knew that false alarms could be dangerous in their own right. He had to be certain before taking any action. He subtly shifted his position, moving behind a decorative column to get a clearer view without attracting attention. The man moved slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd, yet never leaving the prince. Every second felt like an eternity, each heartbeat counting louder in James's mind than the music filling the room. He sent a coded message through his earpiece. Subject in sight. Possible threat near west balcony. Request guidance. The response came almost immediately. Maintain position. Observe and report. Extraction only if imminent threat confirmed. James exhaled slowly, forcing his racing heart to steady. The situation required patience. Acting too soon could alert the suspect or endanger the prince and the guests. But every moment that passed increased the risk. He kept his gaze locked on the man, noting every shift in posture, every glance, every slight motion. It was like watching a complex chess game unfold in real time, where one wrong move could change everything. Meanwhile, the gala continued around him. Waiters glided gracefully between tables, offering champagne and delicacies, while diplomats exchanged pleasantries. Laughter and music filled the air, completely masking the tension that James carried alone. The contrast was almost surreal, the dazzling beauty of the palace and the invisible thread of danger weaving through it. James had seen this before in smaller security drills, but never under the weight of real stakes. The reality of protecting a member of the royal family was both a privilege and a burden, one that he carried silently. The suspect's movements grew slightly more pronounced. He began shifting from foot to foot, his head tilting ever so slightly as if listening to something. James noticed a subtle change in his eyes, a flicker of nervousness that betrayed a plan or intention. This was the moment James had trained for, the moment when instincts and experience converged. He could no longer rely on observation alone. He needed to be ready for immediate action while still remaining discreet. James's mind worked through the extraction protocols methodically. First, he needed to ensure the prince's immediate safety without creating panic. Second, he had to coordinate with fellow guards who were strategically positioned throughout the ballroom. Third, he had to prepare a route for exit that minimized exposure to the suspect. The palace layout, familiar from years of drills, gave him confidence. The hidden corridors, service passages, and discreet exits were all mapped in his memory. He had run through similar scenarios countless times, but tonight was real. There was no room for error. As he subtly edged closer to Prince William, James noticed another small gesture from the prince, a slight tilt of the head almost imperceptible toward the west wing of the room. That tilt confirmed James's suspicions. The threat was real, and immediate measures were necessary. He tapped the earpiece again and quietly informed command. Confirmed, threat imminent, preparing for controlled extraction. The reply was calm but firm. Proceed carefully, ensure discretion, do not alert guests. The ballroom's grandeur suddenly seemed both protective and deceptive. The glittering chandeliers cast reflections that obscured movement, but they also hid potential danger. Every guest's movement was now part of a complex visual puzzle that James had to solve in real time. He watched the suspect, noting every subtle motion, every glance. The man's gaze returned to the prince repeatedly, and the slight metallic bulge under his jacket caught James's trained eye once more. This was no coincidence. James adjusted his position again, keeping a calm exterior while preparing for possible intervention. He subtly signaled two nearby guards with a slight nod and hand gesture that went unnoticed by the guests. Those guards understood immediately. They had been trained for these rare but critical moments. Together, they formed an invisible shield around the prince, ready to act if necessary. Coordination and silent communication were essential. Any misstep could compromise the entire operation. Prince William continued to interact with the guests, his composure unwavering. To the untrained eye, everything seemed normal. But James knew that every gesture, every smile, and every handshake was masking heightened awareness. The prince's confidence and poise were as much a tool of protection as the guards themselves. James felt a quiet respect for the prince, who remained calm under invisible pressure, trusting in his training and the team that surrounded him. Time seemed to stretch as James maintained his watch. The music, the conversations, and the laughter created a surreal contrast to the tension he felt. Each second was measured, each movement calculated. He could feel the anticipation building, not only in himself but in the subtle shifts of everyone around him. The suspect had not yet made a decisive move, but James knew that the moment could come at any instant. Preparedness was everything. Finally, after what seemed like hours compressed into minutes, James noticed the man subtly reach toward his jacket pocket. That was the signal he had been waiting for, a clear indication that the threat was no longer theoretical but immediate. James's fingers itched near his sidearm, but he maintained composure. The plan for a silent extraction now needed to move forward. He adjusted his stance, signaling readiness to the two nearby guards, all while maintaining the appearance of casual attention. The ballroom remained unaware, every guest oblivious to the invisible danger. James's mind raced with the next steps. The extraction route had to be executed perfectly, the prince's safety prioritized above all else. Discretion was paramount. The elegance of the evening could not be broken, yet the invisible web of protection was now fully in motion. Every detail mattered, the placement of other guests, the position of servers, the subtle movements of fellow guards. James had trained for this, and now it was reality. The silent communication continued, small gestures, slight shifts in posture, and the faintest eye movements conveying critical information. James's years of experience allowed him to interpret these signals quickly and accurately. He was fully aware of the stakes. One wrong move, one delayed action, and the gala could turn into chaos. Yet he remained calm, methodical, and ready. Every step taken, every decision made, was guided by training, instinct, and unwavering commitment to protect the prince at all costs. The atmosphere in the ballroom seemed unchanged, yet for Sergeant James Hawthorne, every second carried the weight of danger. Prince William continued to greet guests with his signature calm and warmth, but James's eyes never left the man he had identified as the potential threat. The tall figure near the balcony, with the subtle metallic bulge under his jacket, had grown more restless. His movements, though subtle, betrayed impatience and intent. He shifted from foot to foot, his gaze darting toward the prince, then to the surrounding guards. It was the kind of careful calculation James had seen many times in his career, an individual planning his next move while trying to remain unnoticed. James adjusted his position slightly behind a decorative pillar, allowing himself a better view without drawing attention. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to spring into action if necessary. He discreetly touched his earpiece, relaying observations to Palace Command in low, measured words. Subject confirmed moving, appears to be preparing for action. Extraction protocol may need to commence immediately. The reply was calm but firm. Maintain observation, prepare for immediate action, ensure discretion. James exhaled slowly. He had trained for scenarios like this, yet every real-life situation carried a weight that simulations could not replicate. The ballroom's elegance, the chandeliers casting sparkling reflections across the polished floors, and the gentle murmur of conversation created a surreal contrast to the very real danger present. The grand event, meant to celebrate diplomacy and royal tradition, had transformed in James's mind into a silent battlefield. As James observed, the suspect moved closer to the west side of the ballroom. His steps were deliberate, measured, yet his eyes never left Prince William. James noticed a subtle interaction. The man brushed his hand against a decorative pillar, adjusting something concealed beneath his jacket. That fleeting motion confirmed what James had feared. The threat was imminent. Time to act was approaching rapidly, but any sudden movement could jeopardize the prince's safety. James had to be strategic. He subtly signaled two nearby guards using a barely perceptible hand gesture. Both understood immediately. They had trained together extensively, and no words were necessary. Together, they adjusted their positions, forming an invisible protective triangle around Prince William without drawing any attention from the guests. Their coordination was seamless, each action silent and fluid, the result of countless drills rehearsed in the quiet halls of the palace. The suspect's presence grew more pronounced. He lingered near the edge of the room, scanning for openings. James watched him carefully, noting every twitch, every glance, and every subtle shift in posture. The man's behavior suggested confidence, yet there was a flicker of nervousness. Perhaps he understood that the prince was heavily protected. James knew that confidence could turn to desperation in a moment, and desperation in the wrong hands could be dangerous. Prince William, aware of the threat but maintaining his composure, continued to greet guests. His smile was steady, his handshakes warm, yet James could see the subtle tension in his eyes, the almost imperceptible glance toward the guard. That single gesture reinforced the silent communication they had shared for years. In that fleeting connection, James understood the prince's trust and his reliance on James's experience. The bond between protector and royal was unspoken but unwavering. The suspect moved again, this time closer to the buffet table. James observed that he was scanning for vulnerabilities, testing the positions of the guards and noting the proximity of palace staff. Every detail mattered. James's training allowed him to anticipate the man's intentions, to predict movements based on body language and posture. He calculated the distance, the angles, and the potential for intervention. Everything depended on precision, timing, and calm judgment. James's eyes flicked to the other end of the ballroom, checking for additional threats. None appeared, but he remained vigilant. He knew better than to assume one danger existed alone. Often, secondary threats accompanied primary ones, and a true protector prepared for multiple scenarios simultaneously. His mind mapped the entire ballroom in terms of security: exits, hiding spots, service corridors, and positions of fellow guards. He had planned contingencies for every possible route the prince might take during an extraction. As the suspect continued to move, James noticed him glance at the doors leading to the garden. This observation was critical. The suspect might attempt to isolate the prince or create a diversion to draw attention. James adjusted his stance, preparing for multiple possibilities. His hand hovered near the discreet radio at his belt, ready to communicate any urgent changes. Coordination, timing, and subtlety were essential. The last thing James wanted was panic among the guests, which could turn a controlled situation into chaos. The palace's security measures were extensive, yet the brilliance of James's training lay in using them without being noticed. Cameras, silent alarms, and other guards were part of the plan, but his presence provided real-time observation and judgment that technology alone could not replace. Every movement, every decision, required foresight. He had to be ready to intervene physically if necessary, but also mentally prepared to adapt to sudden changes. The suspect's attention remained fixed on Prince William. James observed a momentary lapse. The man's eyes flicked to a waiter approaching with a tray. That split second allowed James to plan his next action. He whispered into his earpiece, relaying subtle instructions to his team. Position adjustment. Prepare for controlled containment if subject acts. Extraction may need to commence within seconds. Meanwhile, the prince remained calm, a pillar of composure amidst the tension. His movements were deliberate, and his gestures toward guests were smooth and reassuring. James marveled at how the prince could maintain such poise, masking the urgency of the situation with a perfectly composed exterior. It was a skill that came from years of public life, training, and instinct. The trust the prince placed in his guards, particularly James, was absolute. The suspect made his next move. He shifted closer to the prince, blending slightly with a group of diplomats attempting to close the distance. James's mind raced. He had to decide whether to intervene immediately or maintain observation to ensure complete control over the situation. Timing was critical. Premature action could provoke a reaction, but waiting too long increased risk. Every decision required careful calculation. James subtly repositioned himself, moving between the suspect and the prince while keeping his movements concealed from the crowd. He maintained eye contact with his fellow guards, signaling readiness without drawing attention. The silent communication was seamless. They had trained for this, but executing it in real life was far more intense. The ballroom, with its grandeur and beauty, had become a stage for a high-stakes game of precision, patience, and vigilance. The suspect paused briefly, scanning the crowd for a reaction. He had not expected the level of coordination he was now facing. James could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the subtle narrowing of his eyes. The man was calculating his next step, unaware that every motion was being anticipated. James knew that one decisive move from him could neutralize the threat, but it had to be done with absolute control and discretion. Prince William subtly shifted his position, a nearly invisible signal to James that he was aware of the threat and ready to follow instructions if necessary. That single gesture reinforced the trust and understanding between the two men. James felt the weight of responsibility even more intensely. The safety of the prince, the integrity of the gala, and the security of every guest depended on the silent, precise actions of a few trained individuals. The suspect's hand reached toward the metallic object concealed under his jacket. That small movement confirmed James's worst fears. The threat had escalated to immediate danger. James's body tensed, but he maintained outward calm. He knew the exact moment to act, balancing the need for rapid response with the necessity of discretion. The silent extraction plan, rehearsed countless times in simulations, was now fully in motion in a real-life scenario. With a slight, almost imperceptible nod, James signaled the guards around him. They adjusted their positions, creating a subtle protective perimeter around Prince William. The ballroom remained oblivious, every guest still caught in the glamour and beauty of the gala. Yet beneath that surface, a quiet, controlled tension had taken over. James's training, instincts, and careful observation had led to this precise moment. The suspect made his next move, stepping closer to the prince while trying to remain unnoticed. James anticipated his motion, moving just enough to block any direct path without alarming the crowd. Every second felt like a lifetime. The air, filled with music and conversation, contrasted sharply with the focused intensity James felt. He knew that the situation could escalate at any moment, but his mind remained clear, analyzing possibilities and preparing for immediate intervention. Finally, James saw the right opening. The suspect's attention was split, and his next motion could be intercepted without causing panic. James adjusted his stance, signaling readiness. The extraction, carefully planned and rehearsed, was on the verge of being executed. Every detail mattered: the positioning of guards, the movements of the prince, and the timing of action. The ballroom's elegance masked the danger perfectly, yet James's vigilance ensured that the invisible threat was fully controlled. In that moment, James understood the full weight of his responsibility. The safety of a prince, the security of a historic palace, and the lives of everyone in the room depended entirely on his training, judgment, and composure. Every movement, every decision, and every subtle signal could determine the outcome. He was ready. The ballroom sparkled with light and laughter, yet Sergeant James Hawthorne felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Prince William, calm and composed as ever, continued to engage politely with guests, shaking hands and exchanging small talk. To everyone else, it appeared as though the evening was perfect, ordinary even. But James knew that perfection was fragile, and danger lingered just beyond the veil of elegance. The suspect, now fully revealed as a potential threat, had made subtle movements that indicated he was ready to act. His hand hovered near the metallic object concealed under his jacket. James felt the tension in the air tighten, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Every second mattered, and the delicate dance of protection had to be executed flawlessly. One misstep, one hesitation could lead to disaster. James tapped his earpiece lightly, communicating silently with the palace security command. "Extraction imminent, preparing route and securing perimeter." The reply was calm but urgent. "Proceed with caution, ensure discretion. Do not alarm guests." That one line confirmed the plan. Now all the training, preparation, and experience would be put to the ultimate test. The extraction had to be silent, controlled, and seamless. Any sudden movement could panic the guests or provoke the suspect. James moved subtly, positioning himself between the suspect and the prince, a silent shield. He glanced at the two nearby guards who had already adjusted their positions to create a protective triangle around William. Their coordination was flawless, a testament to years of joint training and drills. Prince William, sensing the imminent threat but maintaining composure, subtly followed James's lead. His calm demeanor was critical. It prevented the guests from noticing anything unusual. James admired the prince's poise, knowing that it took extraordinary discipline to remain serene under invisible pressure. That serenity, combined with the guards' vigilance, was the key to executing a successful extraction. The suspect began moving closer, attempting to blend with the crowd. James anticipated every step, carefully adjusting his position to block any direct path. His eyes flicked to the exits he had memorized during countless drills. The side doors leading to the palace corridors, the service passages that could provide a secure escape, and the hidden stairways designed for emergencies. Each exit was part of a meticulously planned route that James had rehearsed repeatedly, but this time it was real. With a subtle nod to his fellow guards, James initiated the first phase of the extraction. They began guiding the prince discreetly toward the side exit, blending with the movement of guests. Waiters, musicians, and diplomats continued their routines, completely unaware that a carefully orchestrated operation was underway around them. James's heart beat steadily, each motion deliberate, each step calculated. Timing was everything. The suspect noticed the subtle shift but could not act immediately without drawing attention. James used the brief hesitation to further advance the prince along the secure route. They moved through the crowd, invisible to most, yet every step was fraught with risk. The guards had formed an invisible perimeter, ensuring no gap existed between the prince and potential danger. James kept one eye on the suspect, the other on the route ahead. Every detail mattered: the polished floor that could cause a slip, the narrow gaps between tables, the guests' unpredictable movements. He adjusted his steps accordingly, always staying between the prince and any possible threat. The ballroom, filled with grandeur and elegance, now felt like a maze of careful calculation and silent coordination. As they reached the edge of the main hall, James signaled the guards to split discreetly. One led the way to the side exit, while the other positioned to cover the rear. Prince William followed closely, his movements precise and controlled, trusting completely in James's judgment. The suspect attempted to intervene, but James anticipated it. A slight shift in position, a firm stance, and the man was effectively blocked from the prince's path without anyone else noticing. The side exit came into view, a narrow doorway leading to a corridor that connected to the palace's secure zones. James moved the prince quickly and silently through it. The corridor was dimly lit, but James knew every turn, every passage, and every possible hazard. The echo of their footsteps was minimal, masked by the distant music from the ballroom. They were now beyond the immediate crowd, but the operation was far from over. James maintained vigilance as they proceeded down the corridor. He communicated with the palace security team through his earpiece, ensuring that backup was in position at the next junction. Every guard along the route understood their role, ensuring that the extraction remained smooth and uninterrupted. The prince remained composed, following instructions precisely, his trust in James evident with every step. The corridor led to a stairwell, a narrow stone passage that had been used in countless emergency drills. James guided the prince carefully down the stairs, mindful of both speed and safety. One misstep could alert the suspect or result in injury. Every movement had to balance urgency with control. They reached the bottom, entering another secure corridor leading to an armored vehicle waiting outside. Outside, the night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the warmth and music of the ballroom. The armored vehicle was positioned strategically, its presence discreet but ready. James guided the prince inside with practiced efficiency. Once inside, the doors closed silently, sealing them off from the suspect and the crowd. James allowed himself a brief moment to assess the situation. The immediate danger was averted, but vigilance was still required. From the vehicle, James observed the ballroom from a distance. The suspect remained inside for a moment longer, confused and unable to approach without exposure. Within seconds, palace security moved in to intercept and remove the threat. The operation, executed flawlessly, relied on timing, precision, and the unspoken coordination between trained guards and the prince. Prince William allowed himself a small exhale of relief, grateful for James's skill and composure. The extraction had been executed without panic, without drawing attention, and without compromising anyone's safety. James's mind remained alert, scanning the surroundings until the armored vehicle moved away from the palace grounds, ensuring that no residual danger remained. The streets around Buckingham Palace were quiet, the night calm and serene. The prince sat in the vehicle, fully aware of how narrowly disaster had been avoided. He turned slightly toward James, offering a silent look of gratitude and trust. Words were unnecessary. The bond between protector and royal was built on experience, instinct, and mutual respect. James reflected on the operation as the vehicle sped toward a secure location. Every decision, every movement had been guided by training, observation, and anticipation. The elegance of the gala, the beauty of the palace, and the grandeur of the evening had masked the danger perfectly. But behind the scenes, a carefully orchestrated operation had ensured safety. The prince's calm demeanor, combined with James's vigilance, had turned a potential crisis into a controlled and discreet success. The armored vehicle moved steadily, carrying them away from the immediate threat, yet the lessons of the evening were clear. Vigilance, preparation, and trust were paramount. Every subtle gesture, every silent signal, and every well-rehearsed drill had contributed to the flawless execution of the extraction. James knew that the evening would be remembered as a successful gala, a night of diplomacy and elegance. But behind the scenes, the quiet work of protection, observation, and courage had ensured that safety prevailed. He remained alert, fully aware that the job of a royal guard never truly ended. The armored vehicle continued through secure routes, guided by experienced drivers and supported by coordinated security teams. James maintained observation, ensuring that no unforeseen complications arose. Prince William remained composed, a quiet presence beside him, reflecting the trust and confidence placed in James and his team. Finally, the vehicle reached a secure palace annex. James guided the prince safely inside, confirming that the threat had been neutralized and that the evening's mission was complete. The operation had been executed flawlessly, without drawing attention and without compromising safety. As the doors closed behind them, James allowed himself a moment of reflection. The night had tested his skills, patience, and judgment. Every drill, every training session, and every experience had prepared him for this moment. The successful extraction was not just a demonstration of skill. It was a testament to vigilance, preparation, and the unspoken trust between a royal and his protector. The night had passed, yet the memory of the gala lingered vividly in Sergeant James Hawthorne's mind. Though the ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, the elegance and laughter of the evening were now memories of a fragile illusion. Outside, London was calm and quiet, the city streets lit softly by the glow of street lamps. Inside the secure annex of Buckingham Palace, however, James and Prince William were far from ordinary guests winding down after a gala. They had endured a silent ordeal, one that tested instincts, training, and trust in ways that no rehearsal could ever replicate. The armored vehicle had brought them safely to the annex, a place designed for high security and discretion. As James guided the prince inside, the gravity of the night began to settle over them both. For James, it was a familiar feeling, alertness, vigilance, and the responsibility of life-or-death decisions. But tonight, it was accompanied by a rare sense of quiet satisfaction. The mission had been executed flawlessly. The extraction had been precise, discreet, and successful, and the prince was safe. Prince William, still composed but clearly aware of the narrow margin by which danger had been avoided, offered James a look that spoke volumes. There were no words needed. Their eyes conveyed trust, gratitude, and understanding. James had protected not only a member of the royal family, but the symbol of stability and tradition for the nation. That weight was not lost on him. The bond between a royal and his protector was a silent one, built over years of training, shared experiences, and an unspoken understanding of duty. As they moved through the secure corridors, James reflected on the events of the evening. Every detail had mattered. The subtle tap of the prince's fingers, the barely perceptible movements of the suspect, the coordination between guards, and the precise timing of the extraction. Each action, each decision, was part of a delicate chain that, if broken, could have led to disaster. He had relied on training, intuition, and experience, and each had proved essential. The prince walked beside James, his posture relaxed yet alert, a quiet reminder of the composure required in the face of danger. Despite the tension of the night, he had never panicked. That calmness had made James's job possible, enabling him to execute the extraction without alarming the guests or compromising safety. Prince William's confidence in his team was evident, and it was a confidence that had been earned over years of shared experience and trust. Once they reached a secure room within the annex, James allowed the prince to settle. He observed him for a moment, noting the subtle relief in his expression. Even those trained to maintain composure could not entirely mask the awareness of how close danger had come. James felt a deep sense of responsibility. It was his role to transform that awareness into calm, to ensure that the prince's safety was never compromised. Tonight, that responsibility had been fulfilled. James took a moment to communicate with the rest of the security team. Through the earpiece, he confirmed that the suspect had been apprehended, the threat neutralized, and that the surrounding areas were secure. Coordination had been essential, and every member of the team had executed their roles with precision. The silent, invisible web of protection had held, ensuring that the prince remained safe and that the gala's elegance remained unbroken for those outside the secure zones. The prince finally spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you, James," he said, his words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. "Your vigilance, your calm, and your judgment tonight, I don't think I could have asked for better protection." James acknowledged the words with a slight nod, though he remained professional, aware that their job was never truly finished. Gratitude was appreciated, but duty was paramount. The work of a royal guard required constant readiness, even in moments of apparent safety. James reflected on the nature of his profession. To the outside world, a gala at Buckingham Palace was a scene of elegance, beauty, and ceremony. The audience saw smiles, handshakes, and music, unaware of the invisible network of protection woven throughout the palace. Guards like James were trained to remain unseen, to anticipate danger, and to act decisively when necessary. Recognition was rare and often unnecessary. The true reward was the knowledge that a life had been protected, a crisis averted, and trust honored. Prince William, sensing James's reflective mood, continued quietly. "I could see you noticing everything," he said. "Every movement, every face. I trust your judgment completely. I know we're safe because you're here." The words were simple, yet they carried profound meaning. In that brief exchange, James felt the depth of trust that had been established over years of service. Protecting a royal was more than a duty. It was a relationship, built on instinct, understanding, and unwavering commitment. Outside the secure walls, the city slept unaware of the events that had unfolded. The gala had continued, oblivious to the invisible tension that had gripped the palace for what felt like hours. James thought about the contrast, the glittering chandeliers, the polite laughter, and the elegance of the ballroom compared to the quiet, intense focus that had been required to maintain safety. The illusion of calm had been preserved, but the reality behind it had been anything but ordinary. As the night wore on, James reviewed the events mentally. Each decision, each movement had been calculated. The subtle gestures of the prince, the careful positioning of fellow guards, the precise observation of the suspect. All had contributed to a flawless operation. He thought about the importance of preparation, the necessity of vigilance, and the value of trust. In high-stakes situations, these elements were the difference between chaos and safety. The prince, noticing James's thoughtful expression, offered a reassuring smile. "You always carry so much responsibility," he said. "I hope you know how much it matters, not just to me, but to everyone who relies on you." James simply nodded, understanding that words could not fully capture the nature of his role. The protection of life, the preservation of order, and the silent fulfillment of duty were rewards in themselves. James spent the next few moments ensuring the prince's comfort and security. He checked the surrounding area, confirming that the immediate threat had been removed and that the environment was stable. Even in moments of relative safety, vigilance was necessary. The night had been a reminder of the fragile balance between elegance and danger, between calm and chaos. It was a lesson that James took seriously, knowing that the next challenge could arise at any time. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, James felt a quiet sense of closure. The immediate crisis had passed. The gala had ended successfully for the guests, the prince was safe, and the threat had been neutralized. But the experience remained vivid in his mind, a reminder of the responsibility inherent in his role. Protection was not about recognition or accolades. It was about readiness, courage, and the silent fulfillment of duty. Prince William, seated quietly, finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about how close danger had come and how seamlessly James had managed every detail. The calm composure that had defined the evening had been made possible by the invisible, vigilant presence of a dedicated protector. In that moment, the prince understood more profoundly than ever the value of trust, preparation, and silent courage. James remained standing nearby, alert yet composed. His mind replayed the events, analyzing each moment, each gesture, and each decision. Lessons were learned, strategies reinforced, and confidence strengthened. The successful extraction was a testament to skill, training, and dedication, but also to the human elements of observation, intuition, and trust. The night ended with a quiet acknowledgement between prince and guard. No words were necessary beyond a simple nod and shared understanding. The events of the evening would remain largely invisible to the outside world, preserved only in the memories of those who had been present. For James, that was the nature of his duty, to act decisively, to protect silently, and to maintain safety without fanfare. As the palace settled into the calm of early morning, James allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been executed flawlessly. The prince was safe. The gala, a symbol of elegance and diplomacy, had continued without disruption. And in the quiet aftermath, James understood the true essence of his role: vigilance, dedication, and the unwavering commitment to protect, no matter the circumstances. Though the night was over, James knew that his watch never truly ended. The life of a royal guard was one of constant readiness, where every gesture, every observation, and every decision mattered. The events of the evening would remain in his memory as a testament to skill, discipline, and the quiet heroism required to protect those entrusted to him. And in that silent understanding, both prince and guard found a rare moment of peace, a fleeting yet profound acknowledgement of trust, courage, and duty fulfilled.